It's that time of the afternoon where we check in on headlines on the Sunday papers, and for that discussion, let's bring in our guest. Lizeka Tandwa is a political journalist, and Karyn Maughan also joins us, legal journalist with News 24. To both our guests, thanks very much indeed for your time. It's lovely to have you on the program with us. Karyn, I wonder if we can begin with you by honing in on the headlines on the Sunday Times. It's a conversation around Enoch Godongwana's take on whether or not this country needs something like a basic income grant. He suggests this is some kind of handout, but doesn't stop there. Goes further to say the job really should be about ensuring there's employment specifically for young people. Does he have a point?
Absolutely. I mean, South Africa is one of the youngest countries in the world, and our youth unemployment rate, and I stand to be corrected, is something like over 70%. When you're dealing with a predominantly young population in any country, that would be a very startling and problematic figure. We also know, for example, that young people, only 18% of them in the last election aged between 18 and 24 registered to vote. That speaks to a hesitancy about involvement in the political system. And really, in a country with such profound inequality as South Africa has, estimated or regarded as the most unequal country in the world, that really is a recipe for social unrest and disaster. And the most important thing here is for young people to feel that they have a stake in the political process and they have a stake in the future of the country, and they themselves have a future. If we have youth unemployment figures as high as they are, nothing about South Africa is telling young people that they have any stake in the future of this country and that this country cares about them and their future. So I think Enoch Godongwana is completely correct on this, but how does government actually go about addressing the massive systemic, educational deficits that have been left by apartheid, the way in which the education system continues to fail young people, and these profound issues with lack of employment opportunities?
Yeah, and Lizeka, it's interesting to note what the Sunday Times article did not do, and that is, by and large, it's reflecting on, call it the cloud that still hangs over Enoch Godongwana. Editorially speaking, was that a wise move or perhaps a missed opportunity?
Well, you might call it a missed opportunity. I'm just not sure, but Enoch has said in interviews with a journalist when he was being sworn in. Sorry about that.
Not a problem.
I'm so sorry. That he was actually the first minister to step aside when he was rocked by the scandal around him and the pension and the pension fund. There's a lot of talk around whether Enoch was the right person for the job, considering that the president has been talking about, getting rid of the rot of corruption in his government and in his cabinet. So it's really interesting. But looking at the markets and looking at economists, how they have viewed the transfer of that cabinet ministry from Tito Mboweni to Enoch Godongwana, it doesn't seem like there has been much of a reaction, a negative reaction to Enoch coming into that position. Minister Enoch does have a relationship with the markets and the investors and business and South African business. He has been in the policy making of the ANC. He has been in government at economic development. So it's not someone who is unfamiliar to that industry, to the business industry, to the captains of industry. It's someone who has had some relation, as opposed to a Des van Rooyen, for instance. So yes, I think it's something that we really need to interrogate. I was one of the people who were very disappointed that the president made this cabinet reshuffle without giving the media some kind of platform to interrogate his decision. But it remains to be seen how we as South Africans and how we as South Africans will interrogate this, and whether the president will be able to give us a platform where we can actually ask him and engage him in the reasons why he went with Mr. Godongwane, given that there is still some cloud over him.
Yeah, and let me stay with you very quickly, Lizeka. As a political journalist, what do you reckon are some of the questions we still need to ask, considering what Enoch used to do before coming into cabinet? In other words, he used to run the ANC's economic transformation department, for lack of a better term. How worried should we be that that kind of hangover might spill over into a work that he needs to do, largely in an apolitical way?
I think there are a lot of questions that we need to ask the president, not just about Mr. Godongwane, but some of the reasons that he shifted the people in his cabinet. Godongwane is primarily, given that we are at a cliff in terms of the economy, he becomes one of the people that we really need to focus on and hone in. There's also the former health minister, Zweli Mkhize, who resigned at the 11th hour, and the president seemingly giving him praises for resigning. What exactly is going on with that SIU report? And when will the president actually give us an idea of the SIU report? While the media has sort of had an idea of the makings of that report, but we need to find out what exactly is going to happen in government and what the president plans to do with that report. We need to. I agree with you that there needs to be an interrogation in terms of why he chose Mr. Godongwane, and what does it say about because when he went into that Nasrec conference, he was talking about transparency. He was talking about a government that is rid of corruption. And what does it say when he employs someone in a very critical portfolio that has to do with the recovery of the country? And like Karyn Maughan has said, that we have 70% of youth, over 70% of youth unemployment, 40% of unemployment. And there's been a lot of talk about basic income grant. What exactly does that entail in terms of our fiscus? How will that, when cabinet is discussing that, how will that impact our fiscus? How will it impact whether we stimulate, how we're able to stimulate this economy that has been drained to its knees?
At the risk of embarrassing both you and me, I have to ask, what's your dog's name?
This is Max.
Max is a star, guys. Max is a star.
Look, I don't mind the color that Max is adding to our discussion, so don't let that bother you at all. I'm in conversation with Lizeka and Tandwa, as well as Karyn Maughan, who are both journalists helping us break down some of the headlines in Sunday papers. We'll continue unpacking particularly what's on the front page of The Star, looking ahead at the week to come with the front page of the City Press, I beg your pardon, looking at the week to come with former President Jacob Zuma set to make an appearance in court, in person this time. What are the implications? That part of that discussion next. Welcome back. You're live on Politics Unscripted. Ayanda Nyathi here, in for Xulim Gambi, and this is the editor's choice part of our program, and for that we have our two guests, Lizeka Tandwa, who's a political journalist, and Karyn Maughan, a specialist legal journalist with News 24. Karyn, shall we look at the City Press today? Their headline is Essay on High Alert, or High Zuma Alert, rather, and this is in reference to what is likely to be another lively scene, no doubt, outside the Pietermaritzburg High Court, as the former president is set to make an in-person appearance. What do you reckon South Africans should be asking themselves ahead of that, given what we're learning from this article, that police, if you like, are being deployed to strategic hotspots in the lead up to that?
Well, I think there has been a lot of understandable criticism of law enforcement in the wake of the unrest that followed the former president's imprisonment by the Constitutional Court, a real sense in which law enforcement was extremely reactive and then overreactive towards the poorest of the poor. I mean, scenes of, people's milli meal being confiscated because apparently they were unable to produce receipts. And it really did not speak to a law enforcement system that was able to preempt or prepare for potential unrest and thus prevent it and the huge economic damage that continues to affect people in KwaZulu-Natal and Gauteng and arguably the whole country in many respects. So I think it is understandable that law enforcement, having been approached by the MPA on this issue of potential unrest, is deploying people in their numbers. Hopefully they're able to do so in a responsible way that doesn't ignite further tensions, and create again a perspective that law enforcement overreacts against the wrong people or against people that they perceive to be a threat when in fact that is not the case. I think there are still major questions over whether or not the special plea hearing will in fact go ahead. We know the former president is in hospital for observation. I have tried to ascertain in the last few hours as to whether or not the hearing will go ahead. His foundation seems to have been very positive, but ultimately it will be a call that will need to be made by medical professionals as to whether he will be in a space physically to attend the hearing and what the consequences of that attendance, will be. But certainly from the former president's perspective, his lawyers have absolutely sought to undermine any suggestion that he was responsible for the unrest that occurred, and have very much come out and said that they believe the situation has stabilized, and that that they sort of sought to undermine any suggestion by the MPA that there was a security threat. So if there is some form of unrest linked to the appearance, linked to the special plea, if it goes ahead, obviously there will be, questions raised about those kind of undertakings going forward. But I think law enforcement wants to avoid a situation where they can again be accused, as they were with the first round of violence, of simply being unprepared and then targeting the wrong people.
Right. Lizeka, to what extent do you reckon Zuma's imminent appearance in court, if it does happen, is the first test of this newly configured cabinet, as well as, I guess, the new configuration that the president has actually undertaken, which is to move the security agency under the presidency?
I think it will be quite an interesting time for the state security and for Mondli Gugubele as well as Zizi Kodwa, people who have come out to support the president in what he was saying in his characterization of the unrest being an attempted insurrection. It's going to be interesting also how the ANC views it, and I look at it from my political standing. When I look at what the Deputy Secretary General, Jesse Duarte, said during a briefing with the media, I think it was Monday, when she was briefing us on what the outcomes of the National Working Committee. And what she was saying is that they have received, these letters from the pro-Zuma grouping, which consists of people like Karl Niehaus and Andile Lungisa, who have been vehemently pro-President Zuma and vehemently calling for the release of the president. And they have been saying, they've been making plans around this court case, and Ms. Duarte did say that these releases and the communication that they've had with the leaders of this grouping, they have sent it to law enforcement for investigation. So it'll be quite interesting, really, in how this now shifted Ramaphosa state security or Ramaphosa law enforcement handles itself. I completely agree with Karyn. And I do think that looking at the people who are at the helm now, I don't see that they could be soft or sympathetic to the people that are the pro-Zuma grouping. So I expect at least that there will be proactive reaction to any sort of unrest or any voice or noise around unrest.
Right. The political week ahead, Karyn, is also interesting because Esmagashule is said to be back in court. I mean, when we consider the optics that Lizeka has just pointed out, how close an eye should intelligence also keep on that activity? Esmagashule being in court, and what could emanate from that?
I think there's a kind of convergence of things happening this week. And of course, President Cyril Ramaphosa being in the state capture inquiry later this week to address specifically, I think one of the most key questions is his apparent lack of action on the scathing high-level review panel report that came out about the intelligence structures several years ago. And I think that, this move, there's a lot of very understandable concern over state security agency functions falling under the presidency and what the implications are for a constitutional democracy of that happening. We've had, the high-level review panel report coming out and saying that the SSA was essentially politicized, that it was serving factional purposes. It was going out and monitoring fees must fall students and NGOs rather than looking at, potential profound security threats to the country. In fact, it was essentially, disavowing its mandate to look after the ordinary South African and ensure that, we didn't face, turmoil, unrest that could be avoided if there was proactive and constitutionally sensitive action taken by law enforcement. And the big thing for me with the Ace Magashule case is not necessarily about a potential security threat around there. It's really about the preparedness of the state to run that trial. There are multiple accused. This is a pre-trial hearing.
Right.
All the accused in the case, the state will need to show itself to be in control, ready and willing to pursue that prosecution. Because my apprehension is that if there is a failure by the state to proceed with that case timeously, we don't know what the defense will do. That's a variable that the state is not in control of. But if there's a failure by the state to timeously deal with that prosecution, and it too is beset by delays as a consequence of law enforcement mismanagement, that will very much be, a very profound piece of political ammunition for people like Ace Magashule and those who support him, who say the NPA is simply, pursuing politically motivated cases. Of course, the NPA has remained adamant that it is intent on dealing with corruption. But if it isn't, effective in getting these cases to court, getting them heard and getting them finalized, it will face accusations that it essentially, has politically neutralized a person who was within the leadership structures of the ANC without being ready to prosecute him. And that, I think, will be more of a problem than anything else.
Yeah. With the political machinations, Lizeka, that have taken place and those that are yet to come in the week ahead, what questions do you reckon the president should not be allowed to get away without answering at the State Capture Commission of Inquiry when he rocks up there in the week ahead?
Well, the president will first speak on, he was supposed to conclude his testimony around cadre deployment, around his time as the ANC as the ANC president. So that's really important that we delve into the ANC's what the ANC has done or how it's been compliant with the capture of the state. I really think that we need to interrogate the president more around this. He has really been very protective around cadre deployment. He's really defended this policy of the ANC, which so many of its veterans have actually said that it has morphed into an organ of state capture. I really would hope that the lead prosecutors, for lack of a better word, do really interrogate him around his time as the deputy president, what exactly was he doing when the president or when there were allegations around the president whom he deputized. And also, he has had this Sydney Mufamadi report. What did he do about the many reports that were in his table that were collecting dust? And it seemingly nothing had happened. I mean, the president has been for a number of years been criticized for taking a snail's pace in terms of dealing with the rot in the ANC and dealing with the rot in government and in dealing with the rot in his cabinet. So what exactly has the president done in his time in the ANC, how was the president complicit, or has the president been fighting, and how has he been fighting state capture? It's quite interesting. There was something that Ace Magashule had said in an interview with the SABC, I think, when he said that there was a time where premiers, individual premiers of the ANC outside of the Western Cape, obviously, were put in a room with the Gupta family. He kind of alluded to that by the top six, and the president was part of that top six. Did he know about these meetings? And if we could interrogate more about the involvement of the Guptas with the top six of the ANC, what was the involvement there? Why was he silent throughout that time, throughout the 9 wasted years that we call them now?
Got you. That was an interview also that my colleague Tammy Ngubeni had with Ace Magashule here on Newsroom Africa. There's so much to consider, not to worry, so much to consider, and that's because there's just so much at stake. But I'll have to leave it there for now. Really appreciate your insights today on Politics Unscripted. Lizeka Tandwa is a political journalist, Karyn Maughan, a specialist legal journalist with News 20.